Hello! Welcome to a Spotlight on DAX, an awesome library built for Deno that provides portable scripting across Windows and Nixes, as well as general app development. For those of you familiar with ZX, also known as Zeeks, DAX is going to look very similar. However, DAX has some key differences, including it's more cross-platform. It uses Deno Task Shells parser under the hood, has a minimal use of globals. By default, there's only a single instance of the identifier, and that's not really required. And it's named after David's cat, so say hello to Dax. Dax is also very well maintained and already has a bunch of releases. It's exactly the kind of thing I love to spotlight, so without further ado, the latest release of Dax is now about 2 weeks old. We're working with 0.28.0. It has an impressive amount of functionality for a library of this type. So I've got this broken down by how we as developers and maintainers tend to encounter the need for the kinds of things that DAX provides. That means we're going to go over logging. It has great logging system, executing commands and dealing with output scraping, redirection, standard input, standard output, standard error, all that stuff, making remote requests, UX helpers such as getting input, progress indicators, and those sorts of things, and a bunch of other helpers and tools that just really don't fit into any other category. Does that sound like fun? It sounds like a good time to me. Let's open code and start exploring. Before we get too deep into features, I want to go over just the basic use of DAX as you would meet it if you first tried it out. So you would import the identifier and use the identifier along with a literal in order to run commands that you would want to run on the host OS. And that's the most basic use of it. So if we do this synchronously and we're just going to look for every instance of localhost and etc hosts, down here is what we run when we find that. So if we change that, however, because DAX is all about transforming one thing so it's useful to feed into the other as part of your system, everything that you would look for in order to help you with navigating of turning the output of something into the input of something else or transforming it in some way would be a method to the right of that literal, like you see here. So if for some instance we wanted to blow this up into an array of strings that based on new lines, we could easily ask DAX to do that for us. So that is the easiest way to kind of figure out where the thing is that you're looking for. If it's transforming, redirecting, feeding it into something else, it's to the right of that template. If it's the logging system or a utility or something else that DAX provides, it's probably accessed with the identifier without the command there, or maybe it would take a command as an argument or something like that. So just to keep in mind as you're going forward, with DAX as far as where you would want to look for things. DAX is written for Deno, so it's thoroughly documented and everything will complete right there in code. It's really easy to get around. So now that we know which way it goes where with DAX, let's jump into the logging system. So one of the things that first caught my eye about DAX was the fact that it had a built-in first-class logging system, which is something that I would really want from a library of this type. Logging functions are probably, if there was a top 10 list of things that I've implemented over and over and over again and never reused, logging has got to be in like the top 5, maybe top 3. So out of the box, you get more granular logging than you would have to just basically console.log and that type of stuff. And you can see it here in the terminal. You have just your usual, and this goes, all of this is just like console, goes to standard error. The usual, boring gray. You can have a log step, which is a sort of a major step in the process. And then you also have ways that you can get someone's attention with warnings and errors. So you have log warn and log error respectively for that, which I thought was really cool. The other thing that is great about it is this logging system is fully customizable. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this one, which is customizing, and you can see what I mean. And I'm not going to redirect that at all. I just wanted to show you that it was going. So we had a normal. We first issued a normal log entry and then a normal error, like we would do with just the normal in respect to we are using the standard default logging facility. And we saw what happened. But if we set the error logger to this anonymous function that doesn't repeat the error or do anything useful, it just says, sorry, I'm out to lunch, and then try it again, you can see that it was replaced. So if you want a different logger for errors, warnings, or that type of thing, Dex has the facilities to do that. And you can do it on the fly as well. So you may want, as far as in sysadmin, DevOps, SRE kind of settings, we refer to it as like best effort logging for types of things. Like we will first try a remote logging server. If that doesn't work, we'll try a local file. If that doesn't work, we'll try syslog or whatever we can do. All of that can be done in custom logging functions here with Dex. So that's why I really appreciate being able to do that, and also being able to have some of the functions behave normally and others, like I would just customize the error logger in most cases, where I might log to a remote server that costs a little bit of money every time I do it. So it's up to you how you do it. And Dex also has something that I really like, which is the concept of log groups. This is especially when you're doing debugging, when you're reading a lot of shell commands, you're scraping the output of one command in order to make it the input of the other, or build some other command with it. And you're doing a lot of logging to try to figure out what's going on with all the expressions that you're using and stuff like that. We tend to indent things so that we can differentiate them as they fly by asynchronously in the console, right? And everyone knows this sort of pain, and we all wish is there like 5 more standard errors that I can opt into so that, so log groups are a way to address that kind of thing. And let's see what happens with this, where we just do the solar system. I was really tempted to do a Rickroll here, and I didn't, and I'll just wait here while you thank me for that. Okay. Customizing. Oh, no, this is grouping. Okay. And at the end, there's a gotcha. So what will happen is every time you call a log group, you're indenting over another tab to the right. So you can log group, and you have the descending staircase. And then you have to just call log group end a specific number of times in order to back up. So this could be really fun with just passing away the remnants of a Friday, building castles like in Mario or something, or, you could get real work done with it. So use it for good or evil, whichever you like. But anyway, that's really for out of the box. I mean, that's a lot that you would expect from a toolbox of things that also has a logging library. This is already a first-class logging library. So executing commands in Dex is really intuitive and straightforward. And if you recall the grep command that we did earlier on in the intro when we were just breaking out kind of the structure, this is very familiar to you. So what sets Dex aside, other than the convenience of having everything accessible by that reference, is the fact that you have all of these great helpers to deal with processing the output of one thing in order to turn it into input to something else, which is commonly what we have to do during scripting. So for this one, I have, instead of grep here, we have just echo, which is the processor, the shell built in. And if you just want to grab the text output, that's very simple to do. And you don't even really need to specify this if all you want is a text, as that's the default. You can also, if you are awaiting JSON as a result of it, you can specify that and access the JSON directly in the, you might probably do this in a try-catch block, or feel like you should, but the library will handle this for you if you need it to. And the other thing is that you can just grab the lines and turn those into an array, which you can operate on. During debugging, you can find that it's helpful to see what actually got printed. So you have a couple of options for that. DAX can print the command before it executes it on the fly with this. Or if this makes more sense in your code, particularly when debugging, when things tend to come out or get turned off with a switch, you can use the set print command right in front of the identifier and turn that on, and then everything will, be extra verbose when it's running, and then turn it off when you don't need it. Running things in parallel is really simple, and again, each one of these can be returning a different kind of thing. And DAX also has a feature where you can await to retry something a certain number of times with a certain degree of back off in between, which is really useful if you have like a slow internal API or something like that, that you want to make sure it works, but it may not work the first time or the second time. So we have that as well. So just to show you what this looks like, we can go ahead and run that. I know how to do this, really, I swear. And this is... my computer is a tiny bit slow because I'm recording, but you can see we got and here we go. We are in the loop where it's going to continue to retry until we interrupt it, because that's never going to work. So that's, and there's more to this. Again, every single segment that we do here comes with a big disclaimer. Go to the DAX website and look at the docs itself, because as long as there's still not enough time to fit everything in here that DAX does. Let's go and take a look at getting the results of commands, because constantly we are having to deal with some things get to standard output, some things get to set to standard error. We have to deal with, and that's significant. So with DAX, you have the option to pipe these things together just like you normally would. You can also turn off standard output. You can quiet it, or quiet standard error if you want it to, by replacing piped with quiet. And what happens is you will get the result, and there are certain things that you can get within that object, which is you can get the results of standard out, you can get the results of standard error, you can get the result code, which is whatever between 0 and whatever it exited with. And the other thing that you can do, if you don't want to deal with doing that all the time, treating them separately, you can just use this thing, which is called capture combined, which is just going to take all of the output, put it together, and then you have a string that you can operate on. So it's really up to you, and even per command, like this might be the best way to do it on when you're using DNS utils or things that come with DNS utils, where this might be the way that you do it when you work with like a backup script or something. So the point is you have options, and doing things differently in succession doesn't look out of place or feel out of place with DAX. With the environment, you should be aware that DAX doesn't re-inherit whatever you set in the process that it spawns back into the parent unless you explicitly tell it to. So if you, as I've done up here, I'm kicking off an echo, and and I'm providing an environmental variable for it, which is DAX, and that's going to be awesome. But this is not going to reciprocate to the parent so that it's set when this call happens. So if I want that to happen, I can use the export env feature, and what that will mean is when this is finished, this is still going to persist past the life cycle of just this echo command. It'll persist for however long the parent DAX process is going to persist for, and I can use that subsequently. And we can run that real quick. And that's exactly what we would expect to happen. So because the life cycle ended here for this environmental ended when this exited, it wasn't here. But since we gave it back to the parent, it was able to propagate when this was called on the second iteration. Arguments in escaping, well, arguments are escaped. And that's one of the things that we should talk about when we're dealing with arguments in the literals. So if you wanted to make a directory with no spaces, you would just put it in quotes. If you wanted to make a directory with spaces, you would just put it in quotes. And Dax is going to treat this as if it were that, if it will escape the spaces for you. So if you were like, normally you would type mkdir and then you would type directory 1, directory 2, directory 3. If you want to do that with Dax, what you're going to want to do is use an array of things that it needs to create for you, or the arguments that it needs to pass to mkdir, and it will do that. So if you want to see how the arguments are escaped, and before it runs and while you're debugging, you can use the raw method there, which will show you exactly what's going to happen when you run that. And the other thing that we want to talk about is different ways that you can deal with standard input. So lots of sci-fi movies have this main part of the plot where someone at the executive function of a spaceship calls down and says, reroute all power from this and transfer it to this and feed it into that. And you're thinking, wow, the future is really loosely coupled. But, you know, with Dax, you can basically take the output of anything and turn it into the input of anything else. And it's really cool in its approach to that. So you have the option with new things that you're spawning, new processes, to either inherit standard input from the parent, which is the default. You can provide standard input as just null. There is no standard input, as if the command were run without any input whatsoever. You can provide standard input in the form of like an array of numbers or whatever. And that would say, hey, wait, if Dax can read that array, shouldn't it be able to read? Yes. And in fact, you could, any reader or readable stream can basically be reconnected, just like you're transferring, you know, auxiliary power to main, or you could just, you know, reroute, you know, some readable stream into the, you know, standard input of a process running in the terminal, which I think is just really cool. So user input is something that we seldom have time, especially if you're working on mostly internal stuff, to do with the degree of attention that we would like our coworkers to see us put into internal facing stuff. We usually don't have a lot of time to write nifty progress indicators or things like that. And again, if we spend any time on doing anything the way that we want it done, it doesn't get reused that much, so it just generally doesn't happen. Anyway, Dax solves that problem for you as well. It's got some cool ways of dealing with input in the terminal. We can just get generic input from the user and mask it or not if it's a password. You also have the option to set default text, like the name is Dax, and don't clear it when the cursor goes on there. So you want them to be able to accept or just hit return to go do it. If it was something that no one would ever pick, obviously you want to clear that when they go to start typing so they don't accept the wrong thing accidentally. You have the option to prompt them with like a yes or no sort of thing and take action on that. And there's also a way to select from a list of things. A more, I think, practical demonstration of using the select prompt might be like asking Deno to get a list of network interfaces. And maybe we're going to pick the one that we use for the proxy, or maybe we're going to pick the one that we're going to listen for connections or whatever. And in which case we would just grab the array of those, however way we wanted to present them, and present them instead. So let's just go ahead and run this and show you how it looks, which is prompts. What's your name? Dax. No, actually, my name is Tim, but I'm going to pretend to be Dax the cat on the internet. No one knows who you are, I swear. Would I like to continue? Yes. True. What is my favorite color? My favorite color is teal. And here we go. Big, egregiously long list of interfaces because network compatibility is hard. We will just go down, and maybe I want to select this one. And if you didn't catch the first list flying by, what this is going to return is an index where in the list you ended up accepting, which you can use as your needle to go through the array that you presented to figure out what the choice was. So in this case, we're going to pick this one, and that is at position 12. So we would know to go there. So if we were going to do all of that code ourselves, that would be a lot. So this is really, like I said, I don't see someone using DAX and not sooner or later finding a reason to use these things. And we also have progress bars, which in DAX are extremely flexible and cool. We have the basic, hey, I'm doing work, so don't panic that nothing is happening indicator, which will just continue to sit there and indicate until we call finish on it, or the thing finishes. And there's also the concept of we have evenly sized tasks in a certain number of them that have to be done. And if one, or let's say 3 out of 10 of the tasks are done, then we must be roughly 30% of the way through. That would be okay. For instances where you have like 8 things that take a second and 2 things that take like an hour, you also have the PB position val, and this will take a number and which is relative to the percent complete of the graph. So if you want it to be like 40% done, you could indicate it that way, and you can have as many of these as you want. You see that I build them by using the progress method, which is accessible from the identifier, and you can have as many as you want. Just make sure that you operate on them addressably. And that's all that you have to do. So making requests is a big part of scripting these days, and any first-class library for scripting should have a feature for it, and DAX certainly exceeds in this department. Making a one-off request like you would with curl can be as simple as if it's just a GET request, constructing the URL and using the request method directly from the identifier, and that would be all that you would need to do. I've run this here in the terminal, and we're using the National Weather Service API, which has if you have no other routes, just a echo server, and it's telling us that it's alive and okay and doing fine. So that is the simplest form of it. In real life, we have a lot of authorization headers and other things like that we have to put into it. And we build those programmatically, which is why DAX has a really nice RequestBuilder interface that we can use. So the same example, but in this case, we're saying, look, we want this to have a timeout. We're specifying JSON as the return type. And we need to set some of these headers before we're able to use make the request. And notice that I'm importing RequestBuilder, not the default reference to the library in doing this. Yeah, it's just something to take note of. Things of that nature. One of them is the Path API that it offers, which is built off of some Deno internals that also aim to make life easier for integrators and people that have to deal with needing a lot of confidence when they put things in places where they're supposed to go. So we create a path spec or path ref from the path method, which is accessible through the identifier. And from there, we can do and find out some interesting things about that specification. We can find out, is it a relative path? If not, can we convert it to an absolute path? And the other thing that can be really, really kind of hairy for programmers when in your head you're concatenating this path specification of where this thing is supposed to be, and you're wondering, do I have too many slashes? Did I trail this? Did I cut trailing slashes in this output but not in this output? You have the creature comfort of having the join method. Once you have that path object with DAX to do that for you neatly. And there's different ways to instantiate path references. If you instantiate a relative path from like the current working directory, wherever that may be, and you're looking forward, that is a relative path. Whereas a literal path like /temp is absolute. And you can also convert URLs to things such as if you have like URL imports that have to map to the file system, you can do that with the path utility in Dax, which is easy to do. And there's also metadata if you wanted to get like from the current module to figure out where something was installed or things of that nature. So while this isn't listed as a helper on the site, it's in the category of things that just are there to help you. And I strongly encourage you to check that out, especially if you have to do any kind of building or build things that require you to be extra careful about those trailing slashes and those sorts of things. We will also look at some of the helpers. Dax is a community project, so it has a lot of community involvement. And as such, it's beginning to show signs of people scratching the one thing that annoys them greatly about dealing with their jobs. And David had brought a lot of this, but there's also other contributors. So you can set the current working directory for any process pretty easily just by doing that, which is something we often forget to do, especially before we start operating, assuming that we're there. So that'll take care of it. Sleep for a determinate amount of time is easily accomplished with relative time to do, which is often a pain in scripts, especially using JavaScript or TypeScript. We have a which command, which functions just like the which command, except it's implemented in Dax, so you don't have to rely on it to be there. And there's also another way to figure out if a command is installed, which is the command exists, and there is a synchronous version of that if you need that. We have gone over ways that you can, this is looked at as kind of a helper, but it's also part of just executing, being able to retry. Like if we were using the request API, we would love to be able to, do that with retries, and it's there. Get rid of arbitrary ANSI escape sequences that you might have scraped from the output of something else, especially if there was an error or something. And also the dedent, which in logging we talked about the ways that we love to like indent in our logging so that, we can kind of fit, well, if it's all the way over there, that's the third process. If it's all the way over here, it must be the parent process. That sort of noise is easy to get out of the output as you transform it. And again, it looks somewhat like a little bit of a mixed bag of things if you look at all of these things individually. But the main message and what the library does incredibly well at this point is just a collection of things that are there when you need them and sort of as you need them. So in short conclusion, Dax is everything that you need if your main targets are Linux, the Unix-like operating systems, and Windows. Dax is pretty much everything that you would need in order to make sure that your scripts both ran and behaved appropriately and correctly and performed well under a wide variety of tasks. And given everything that it does and relatively small footprint for what it does, it really is a great decision to use Dax. And it is supported very well by the community. It's growing in popularity. David, the author, is extremely responsive, releases often, is very receptive to pull requests, new ideas, and just general people pitching in. And for Dax to become the ultimate library for integrators and installers and those kinds of folks that tend to get into the plumbing a lot more than other front-end devs do sometimes. It really needs more people using it every day. and coming back with their particular thing that drives them crazy and solution for it that fits within the philosophy of how DAX works. So the more people that use it and solve their major problem with it and contribute back, the better it's going to be. And as you can see with already interfacing with the creature comforts that are in the Deno reserved namespace for integrators and those sorts of things, DAX is really setting you up for success. So I strongly encourage using it. Thank you for watching this spotlight, and we'll see you for the next one.